Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Bracken. I'm the president of the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to the fourth in a series of 5 webinars we are doing supported by Bank of America. We call this series the Business Case for Diversity, and today's discussion will be around the topic of supplier diversity, which is a priority we've been working on in partnership with our colleagues at the African American Chamber of New Jersey. Together, our plan is to challenge every business in the state, in every corner of the state, to change the status quo for the better, and it will end up with a better New Jersey when this is all done and this issue starts to unfold and we make progress on it. Last week, we issued a call to action to our board, and over the next year, we will be working very closely with our members to expand their capacity to diversify their suppliers. And I would just add, if any of you would like to join us and talk about that issue with us, please comment to us in the chat box or reach out to us after the call through our website. Let me start with a couple of housekeeping items, please. First of all, we are recording today's webinar, and a replay will be made available starting tomorrow. Secondly, our panelists, after they wrap up their discussion, will have a Q&A. And if you wish to ask a question, again, please utilize the chat box and we will answer as many questions as we can up until the 10 o'clock cutoff date. And finally, and most importantly, I'd like to thank Bank of America, our partner and sponsor for this series of webinars. I'd like to acknowledge Alberto Garafallo, who is president of Bank of America, New Jersey, and a member of the State Chamber Board of Directors. Unfortunately, Alberto could not join us today. He's been a great partner of the Chamber, and Bank of America has been a stalwart corporate supporter of diversity and inclusion, and we're very happy to partner with them on many issues involving diversity and inclusion. I might add that Edith Dank, the Senior Vice President and New Jersey Market Manager of Bank of America, is in our audience today, and I want to thank Edith for all the work she's done with us to enhance the relationship we've had with Bank of America. Also, I would add that Bank of America announced this year they are committing $1.25 billion over 5 years to programs advancing racial equality and economic opportunity. There is more information about this initiative on the Bank of America website, and I encourage you to go there and check it out. It is now my pleasure to introduce our Senior Vice President at the New Jersey State Chamber, Patricia Teppenhart, who will introduce today's moderators.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, everyone. As Tom said, my name is Patricia Teppenhart, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives with the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce, with a focus on our commitment to diversity and inclusion. Today, with the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey, we are working to advance 5 strategic priorities: workforce diversity, board diversity, access to capital, corporate citizenship, and supplier diversity, the topic about which we'll be talking today. Today's conversation is intended for an audience of colleagues at different stages in their life cycle of implementing or participating in supplier diversity programs. Wherever you are in your journey, we're glad you're here. Our goal is to hit upon points that will resonate with you based off of where you are in your journey, and we invite you to continue this work as we engage in subsequent webinars in the new year, and also join Tom's call to action so we can work on this together. But now let me introduce today's discussion moderators. Jill Johnson is the co-founder and CEO of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership based in Newark. EIFEL, founded in 2002, is an independent, not-for-profit organization that supports economic development through entrepreneurship. With over 30 years of experience as a business strategist, Jill is a pioneering voice for inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems and is especially focused on creating a new paradigm for the access to capital conversation. Most recently, Jill conceived and launched the Women of Color Connecting initiative to change the way we think about building the capacity of women of color entrepreneurs for the grow, scale, exit trajectory. She is also spearheading the Making of Black Angels movement to drive diversity and inclusion within the angel investing sector. And Dale Favors is an inspirational sales coach and strategic business leader. He spent 26 years as a financial professional working in sales and sales management for firms such as Morgan Stanley, Bloomberg, Royal Bank of Canada, Piper Jaffray, and Thomson Reuters, where he built relationships with some of the world's largest hedge funds, asset managers, corporations, and public pension plans. Dale is a managing partner at Adaptive Growth Leadership, a professional services firm focused on sales and leadership training, coaching, and strategic business initiatives centered on customer engagement and corporate culture development. He is also an active member of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce Board and a member of our Supplier Diversity Committee. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill and Dale.
Good morning,
everyone. Good morning. Good to be here. I would say this just to get it started. Jill is a dear friend, longtime neighbor, and we've had the opportunity to raise our families together. So we understand the importance of diversity and thought, spirit, and energy. And what we have with us today is a dynamic group of individuals who are going to bring those same things here. And so in working with Jill, we're going to share some conversations with Ms. Hester Agudosi, who's joining us.
There she is.
Okay. Mr. John Harmon. And Mr. Terrence Clark. And if you can't, Hester, we're gonna go around the room. Hester, if you could please tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and I think we'll get it started that way.
Great. Good morning. Thank you again to the New Jersey State Chamber of Commerce, as well as the African American Chamber of Commerce for hosting today's program. It's so vitally important. My name is Hester Agudosi. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Diversity Officer for the New Jersey Office of Diversity and Inclusion. The office is in state government, and we are principally involved in ensuring that we have a robust and diverse supply chain in the state of New Jersey.
Thank you, Hester. John Harmon.
Hey, good morning. And I too want to thank the New Jersey State Chamber and all the work that they're doing in partnership with our organization to make a difference in the state, and thank Bank of America for their support of this very important initiative. I serve as the founder, president, and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey. 1.2 million Blacks in our state and over 80,000 Black businesses, and we try to set an agenda to put them in a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Terrence.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. I'm Terrence Clark. I'm the president and CEO of the New York, New Jersey Minority Supply Development Council. It's a mouthful, so we'll just call it the council. We are part of the National Minority Supply Development Council network. Our particular council covers the state of New York and the northern and central regions of New Jersey up to and including Trenton. Our goal is twofold. Number one is to certify minority businesses, and to certify what we're talking about is certifying that they are owned, operated, managed, and controlled by an ethnic minority or minorities. And number two, it's to get corporations throughout the country, and specifically in our area, to integrate their supplier diversity and their supply chain system so that these businesses that we certify have an opportunity and chance to enter these systems. So I want to thank the State Chamber of Commerce and John with the African American Chamber of Commerce in New Jersey for putting this on, and hopefully we will get some information today that'll be beneficial to all parties involved. Thank you.
Well, Dale, I am so excited about this conversation. How about you?
Totally. I think we're going to have a great conversation because of the diversity in the group that we have, but also the thought leadership that we have. And I want to share a couple of things because I want the audience to understand what we're really trying to do here is make the case for supplier diversity, and in understanding that diverse supplier sourcing can be a benefit to all the involved. It can have a positive impact on obviously supply chain resiliency, but also it gives an opportunity to impact communities from a social and economic standpoint. We're talking about growth in communities. We're talking about the spread of economic access or access to capital, as well as economic opportunity. In speaking specifically to Terrence's organization, the National Minority Supplier Diversity Network, they report that certified minority business enterprises generate somewhere around 400 billion in economic outcome, 2.2 million jobs created, as well as 49 billion in annual revenue for states and local governments. So obviously, this has a very, very positive impact. So I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to ask to all of you, but let's start with Terrence.
Well, Dale, hold on just 1 second.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, I just want to also make sure that we're all on the same page, that small business is the American way, right?
Absolutely.
That is part of the fundamentals of this country and the foundation upon which it was built. People being able to use their labor and their talents to create commerce and to have an economic platform. And I know you're going to start doing your round robin, but one of the things I would love to just give John a little bit of a platform here to set the foundation for us. And Dale, you know me, I'd like to get right to the heart of the matter.
I love it.
That nice big American flag in his background. John, can you please set the stage for us about, this relationship between the success of Black-owned businesses and economic, social, and every other type of justice?
Well, I think you all kind of come at this conversation from different perspectives, but at the end of the day, it's about making, in this case, New Jersey more competitive by leveraging resources, opportunities, and information, all with the ultimate goal to get people in a better place. Jill talked about the historical perspective. We can go back as it relates to Black people. Booker T. Washington founded the Negro Business League in 1900 as a means of promoting free enterprise and capitalism. This is about 35 years removed from the Emancipation Proclamation. And many of the participants in Booker T. Washington's movement transitioned over to Greenwood, Oklahoma, Tulsa, and they started Black Wall Street. Again, Blacks being segregated, the Jim Crow laws just pushing them out. So they had to kind of fend for themselves. So entrepreneurship, supplier diversity, this is all about being more self-sufficient and not being overly reliant on government, but working within the ecosystem of this country and this state to have more boats rise, more boats elevated, and have less dependence on entitlement spending. That's how we see it. And this is why we forged this relationship with the New Jersey Chamber. Similarly with Terrence, Terrence is the kind of certifying agency in this circle. And then Hester helps us set policy to ensure that we're part of this public contracting. And then Terrence brings us into the private sector. So it's a public-private sector partnership that brings community in a better place. And so that's kind of how I see it, Jill. And we've run this African American Chamber of Commerce now going on 15 years to encourage more folks to bring their products to serve and services to mainstream commerce in a meaningful way. And so I'll yield back, there's more to come, but at the end of the day, I firmly believe that there's no ceiling in terms of what you can make on your own business enterprise versus working for someone. So the sky's the limit is clearly a pathway to wealth, pathway to independence, pathway to self-sufficiency, but for a better life overall. That's my 2 cents.
No, I think it's important, and a great way to lead us off, John. And Terrence, why don't you tell us a little bit your thoughts on why supplier diversity is so important?
Well, our organization has probably been doing this type of work for supplier diversity for the last 48 years, actually. and it's spanned, I think, 7 presidents. But the long and short of it is what it does. All of the companies that we deal with, and we deal with those companies that first and foremost have an interest in diversifying their supply chain. They're generally in the Fortune 1000. They are primarily in the private sector. They aren't under any obligation to do this. This is something that they want to do for various reasons. You know, some, it's certainly from a standpoint of your supply chain, the more people you have in the supply chain, the more competition you have, and then the more different ways you can find out how to diversify thought, how to bring costs down, because most companies looking at it, what's your differentiator? What can you do to enhance our revenue, reduce our cost, and most importantly, not just enhance revenue and reduce our cost, but what's innovative is going to keep that you may offer that's going to keep me in front of my competitors.
There it is.
So, you know, there has to be a business model for it. What it can't be is a social program, because social programs do not last in for-profit businesses very long. Because when the cheerleader leaves, the program leaves with them.
Amen.
So what generally happens, and what we always tell people as we are helping them put together supplier diversity programs, and why is this important? This works better from the top down. If the CEO, CFO, COO says this is something they want to do, it gets done. But if you have a supplier diversity person who says this is a great thing, like I said just before, if they leave, this leaves with it. There's to be an economic benefit for this to work. And what we try to show people is what the economic benefit within their organization can be by having more suppliers within your organization to help you look at things differently, and also to attract you to a new clientele, which is based upon the changing census of this country.
Wow. So Hester, to follow that up, obviously we heard about the importance, and Jill really reiterated this, of small business. And John came in and supported that. And that's what this foundation, this country is all about. And then the understanding that having a broad supply network is important. What does this mean from perspective from the state level?
So oftentimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion and supplier diversity, we talk about the business case, right? And I think it's important to speak to, from a government standpoint, really what that position is. So unlike the private sector, government doesn't operate based upon a competitive business model, right? Because we get your tax dollars and we take those dollars and we provide the services that we do to our citizens. So unlike in the corporate sector, where it's a matter of being competitive, what we find in the public sector is that we've really lagged when it came to embracing diversity and inclusion, as well as supplier diversity, because that business model or that business imperative was not there. But nonetheless, what we know that is the state of New Jersey, by all accounts, is the 4th most diverse state in the union, right? So to the extent that we are government and we are providing services to our citizens, then that means by definition, we're providing services to a diverse population. And so now when we look at the businesses that are registered here in the state of New Jersey to do business, almost 60% of them are diverse businesses, minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. So from a public sector standpoint, now we have to look at our supply chain. Who are we getting our goods and services from? To the extent that we are engaging and providing services to a diverse citizenry, it's their tax dollars that we're using. We should ensure, equity should ensure that those dollars are equitably being apportioned, particularly when we're talking about our supply chain, not only because we're using tax dollars from a diverse citizenry, but also in light of the fact that almost 60% of our businesses are diverse businesses. But what we found we'll go back 15 years ago, the last time the state of New Jersey had a disparity study, is that we did not have a diverse supply chain. That when we broke that down, not only did we have less than 5% of our spend going to diverse businesses, but as we started off this conversation, particularly focused on African-American or Black businesses, oftentimes we found that that number could hover somewhere in the area of 1%. And I think that that's damning and enlightening in terms of the work and the effort that government has to ensure that we are equitable, to ensure that our supply chain is diverse. And fortunately, this governor has run on a platform of growing a fairer, stronger, and inclusive economy. And that's why we are in the process of doing a disparity study now. That's why we have a New Jersey Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And that's why we have been involved in trying to seek to ensure that diverse businesses in the state of New Jersey, A, understand how our process works, our procurement process. They have access to information of how to align their businesses, and more importantly, that we're telegraphing and messaging to them through forums, outreach, seminars, where those opportunities lie in terms of procurement opportunities.
Thank you, Hester. So Dale, I know you're a sports guy, right? We can even see from your background there, you're a sports guy through and through. One of the examples that I like to use, kind of to frame that business case, if you will, is looking at the Negro Baseball League, right? MLB thought that they had the most amazing players, but you had this Negro Baseball League who was over here off to the side, playing their own games in their own forum. And when the powers that be decided, hey, let's open up those gates, right? We realized then that maybe the MLB didn't have actually all the best players. They wouldn't have known because there was a whole group of players that were not permitted to participate. And when those gates were opened, we had some amazing players that came from the Negro Baseball League that changed the game. That's what we need to do here in this conversation that we're talking about with diverse suppliers as well.
Yeah, wow. I totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, you see it, obviously, Jill, you bring up a point that not only once baseball became more inclusive, you also saw the economics grew.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we're really trying to take on. So I think it's a good point there.
Hey, can I follow up on that sports analogy from Jill? Because
absolutely,
I think it's profound.
Oh, did John freeze? I love that he froze on that was profound. That was great. That's a great.
Yes.
Profound.
They kind of sense that Brother Harmon is probably about to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, John.
Maybe that break was good because I was probably about to go real left. So gave me a chance to rethink some of my thoughts. But, from a sports perspective, I've been in a few conversations with senior corporate representatives, and I kind of use a similar example. Sports is all about winning championships. And sometimes in business, the players are rather subjective. I know this person for a number of years. We grew up together, we worked together, and that person may be relatively good at what they do in terms of product, service, et cetera, but they may not be the best. And so by leveraging a larger swath of individuals, businesses, in this case, I think today we're trying to address the question of, why we're here and how. So when we talk about this from the private sector perspective, that it's about profitability, it's about stockholder value, it's about impacting the bottom line. And just put a pin in that for a second. And then from the public sector perspective, you have taxpayers who are funding the cost of services, roads, bridges, highways, safety, security, lighting, energy, et cetera. And all that is brought to fruition by legislative decisions and ultimately the administrative or the executive branch are driving an agenda. So we come at this saying, okay, well, where's the reciprocity, right? If Blacks are spending 1.4 trillion annually, that is impacting somebody's bottom line. Just from that nexus point, there should be some relationship. There should be some conversation. If we're paying taxes here in the state of New Jersey, but we have to do disparity studies to be included in opportunities where we see other groups, because of their political contributions or because of them getting out the vote, they're given preference in public contracting. And so that's where the contention comes. That's where the rub. And so we step back and say, hey, we can bring innovation. We can bring efficiencies. Our cultural experience could lead to better marketing strategies that could lend to more revenue generated for your business, et cetera, et cetera. Terrence talked about the value proposition, and he's absolutely right. Emotion will get you in the room, but if you can't bring more efficiency, more impact to the bottom line, your stay is going to be very short. Ernst & Young speaks to, so this supplier diversity conversation is well documented. Higher profit margins, better efficiency, more profitability, but yet there's still pushback. And I submit to you, and I'll close on this point, a lot of what's occurring today is as a result of the murder of George Floyd. And some of these conversations started with the Civil Rights Act in '64, and Dr. King, Medgar Evers, and Malcolm X between '64 and '68. A lot of Black advocates were destroyed. But they were just trying to make the argument that we have contributed to the greatness of America, be it 170,000 slaves in the Civil War. Now we have a United States. Lewis Latimer making the filament in the light bulb that gave sustainability to Thomas Edison's invention of the light bulb, which would not have stayed on, but for the leveraging of the filament of the son of a slave. So at the end of the day, it's about perceptions. George Floyd was killed because his life was not valued. There was not consequences for the law enforcement officers, in his case, in other cases, not having to suffer any consequences. So that narrative has been a part of our existence in the United States. So that's it. The perception is we cannot deliver the same quantitative and qualitative outcomes as others. And so we're saying that's not true. And so all we're asking is an opportunity to compete, to provide value. I'll throw it back with that.
Thank you for that. Dale, should we talk now about pipeline development? You want to go there?
I just want to ask one question before we go there, because John brings up 2 points, and one is about partnership, and the other was the pushback. Those 2 P's really caught me, and so I really wanted to hear Hester and Terrence talk a little bit about both of those. And Hester, I'll start with you from a standpoint of pushback. If the case has been made about the economic side of this, why is there still pushback, you believe, from a standpoint of embracing this effort for supplier diversity?
So thank you. And I absolutely wanted to piggyback on John's comments, which I agree with, and I'll just shed this light on it. Again, when we talk about public sector and how we move, right, we have to do so under the light of court scrutiny. And so as it relates to a disparity study, that's not something that we do because we want to do. That's something that we do because we have to, because the Supreme Court has come down with a decision saying that to the extent that government intends to put forth any programs that are race conscious or gender conscious to address disparities, that there must be documented evidence of such. So that is the foundation and the reason behind the state being involved in the disparity study, because we want to ensure that in order to address these programs, and that's one of the problems, frankly, of why New Jersey has been handicapped to a certain extent, because when it moved forward under an executive order to implement some race-based goals, that was prior to the Supreme Court decision coming forth. And when that decision came forth, basically saying, you can't just do this in isolation, but you have to do this because there's some documented evidence and data to suggest that there's a disparity. That is what kind of set New Jersey back in moving forward with those set aside goals that have been put in under prior administrations. But be that as it may, I just want to say this because I think it's fundamentally important. And that is, when we're talking about economic access, what Jill was saying, right? Small business. When we're talking about economic access, when we're talking about how we lift up communities, what we know is that minority-owned businesses, diverse-owned businesses employ people of color, generally in greater numbers than non-diverse businesses. So to the extent that these businesses have a level playing field, these businesses have access, we know that they are not only providing income and opportunity for itself, but it's also lifting up others in the communities. And there's no better way to do that, because I can tell you, sitting at the seat in government, when I look at the millions of dollars in contracts that go out day in and day out, and understanding that if diverse businesses are integrated into our supply chain, what that impact would be, not just on that business, but on the community in which that business is situated in, and the employees that are able to grow and scale within that business. That's really how you grow a stronger, fairer, and inclusive economy. So it's important. And one of the things that you look at in this disparity study is not just, well, how many of these businesses do we have in our supply chain, but what in our processes may be preventing these businesses from having access. And that's important too. And that's a whole nother conversation, but that is very needed work when we talk about examining our processes and our systems that may intentionally or unintentionally make the playing field not level.
And Hester, just a follow-up on that, so everyone is clear, private companies don't have to wait for a disparity study. Is that right? Right, I just want to make sure
Yes,
everyone's crystal
that's
clear on
correct.
that. So
Yes,
the
that's
private
correct.
companies that we're talking to here in this session, you can go ahead and move. You don't have to wait for a disparity study. That's a matter of what you want to do internally as part of your business practices.
Well, I'll jump in here because basically the people that we deal with are private companies by and large. And you don't have to wait for a disparity study. Actually, just what you have to have is the will to want to do this.
There you go.
That's what it really boils down to. You have to find that this is something that is important in the continued growth and development of your business, whether it's a publicly held company or a privately held large company. And we represent both. But it's a deeper story than just this. And it's, you know, I mean, we've been in a diverse country for at least certainly in hundreds of years. And we can have all these programs that we want. So I'm going to say something that's going to be a little off the key, but what this really boils down to, you're dealing with a company, but you're really dealing with a person. Okay? And here's the issue. If I like you, I might be willing to do business with you. If I don't like you, or if I don't like who you represent, I can figure out ways not to do business with you. That's the issue that a lot of people do not want to address. You can have all of the programs you want. You can have a variety of different checks and balances, but people have figured out ways not to make this happen. And that comes down to the fact that it's all about relationships and you're dealing with individuals. You can represent X company, but the person that you're dealing with in the procurement spot is an individual. And they can figure out a way not to do business with you. They don't have to. And we see that quite often. I've had conversations with chief procurement officers, procurement professionals, and people in supplier diversity. The supplier diversity person is generally the cheerleader that gets you in the door because they don't buy anything. The people that buy things is your category managers and your procurement officers, and they take that to the chief procurement officer who may end up taking that to the chief financial officer. But if I have a certain bias, let's just say, against minority business owners or minority people, I can find a way to make this as hard for you as possible, especially in the private sector, given the fact that there is no mandate that this has to happen. And that is the conversation, honestly, that most people do not want to have. That's how people are going to get in the door at a larger and better way. But right now, I could have a company have a goal of, we want to do $50 million of business with minority-owned businesses, find 3 people that can do that, and I'm finished. What happens to the other X number of folks who want to get in that door? They get what ends up happening is they get, here's why we can't do this with you. Capacity. Maybe we're not buying your product, or we have somebody that has a multi-year contract. I mean, there's a variety of ways you can parse this not to do things. What you got to figure out is, do you have not only the upper part of management will to do this, but the people who actually do the work, are they invested in this? If they're invested in this, this gets done. If they're not invested in this, I will tell you very simply, it don't get done. It sounds good, but it becomes a check the box kind of thing. And a lot of people, as John mentioned, made pronouncements and statements after the last May's death of George Floyd. What we're trying to do is get those statements to be actual. And I can tell you, and John knows this also, and I'm sure Hester does too, very few of those dollars have been actualized since those statements were made from May 25th of 2020 to today. A lot of conversation, but not a lot of action.
So Terrence, they used to say, no trend, a lot of motion, no action. And so Terrence is right. Will is going to carry the day. Relationships are important, but the goal is impact. So oftentimes it's a lot easier to find the firms with the most capacity and experience and plug them in. That's not a hard lift to do that. But the challenge is that second and third tier, because that's where the impact is going to be made. If 93% of Black businesses in New Jersey are sole proprietorship, that tells you right off that there's only 7% that have more than 2, 3, 4, 5 employees. So you got to really look at the landscape and map out a strategy. But again, it starts with perception. If the perception is that there's only a certain group in society that can meet the core competencies or the stated objectives, then the multitudes, our folks, are going to be eliminated. This engagement with the New Jersey State Chamber is about how do we forge a new paradigm by leveraging the corporations that exist within the membership of the New Jersey Chamber and the members of the African American Chamber, so that we can impact New Jersey's 93% and get that number in a better place. I want to give a few more examples because I think there's some people that are on this communication today who's interested, but they still, because of their ecosystem, their sphere of influence or their relationships, have not seen or heard Black people doing things at the level that we're talking about. Refrigeration. So we look at the air conditioning system in our offices, in our homes. You know, Fred McKinley Jones, Black man, started the whole refrigeration process. Now Thermo King. So current, if you look at the pandemic, all the bodies that had to be placed in trailers because they couldn't put them in the morgues. There was a Black guy, a part of that innovation. The blood plasma, you know, Charles Drew, and then he couldn't even get a transfusion when he needed it. That just speaks to the culture. The traffic lights, the gas mask, brother named Garrett, he pulled that off. The layout of Washington, DC, Benjamin Banneker. You know, you want to go back to sports? Josh Gibson hit almost 900 home runs. And so you talk about guys that's, you know, taking drugs, enhancements to hit. This brother was probably hitting a lot of pork chops and greens, but he hit over 900 home runs. Black people had their own stadiums. So they had all the concessionary, the revenues driven from the hot dogs, the hamburgers, the ribs, the chicken, the Cokes, the Pepsi, whatever. And so they dressed up in the afternoon after church to go to the games. Then they ended up putting lights in stadiums later on to accommodate the night games. You know, Mary McLeod Bethune, she met Procter & Gamble. They invested in her vision to start Bethune-Cookman College, a college that was built on a landfill in Daytona Beach, Florida. But she made that connection because she had relationships with Roosevelt's wife. She made that introduction. Go back to the earlier conversation I talked about.
John, it will take much more time to have a whole history lesson here.
All right, last point I want to make, and I'm going to yield back. I don't have to say anything else. Talked about Booker T. Washington. So we talk about relationships, but Booker T. Washington was an advisor to President Taft. And then President Taft started the U.S. Chamber of Commerce 12 years after Booker T. Washington. So what I'm saying is that Black people from the beginning of these United States have been an integral part of making America great, making America one of the best countries in the world. And so it's getting lost in the supplier diversity discussion because people still think we're less than and we cannot knock the cover off the ball. That's the point I want to make in 2021.
No, that was amazing. You know, there are a couple of questions that are here in the chat. So Dale, should I go
Jill,
to that?
can I just make a brief comment?
Absolutely.
Yes, brief, because we want to get to these questions in the
I
chat.
get it, but I
Thank
think it's important, and I think it'll wrap this all up, right? Which is this. We started off with the business case for diversity, and we know that there's a plethora of data out there to demonstrate that diversity enhances the bottom line of bringing in more dollars, more revenues, better quality products, et cetera, so forth, right? So when we're talking about what one can do and the barriers to it, it starts with if we can agree, and the data without question establishes that diversity enhances our competitive advantage. Diversity provides us to get the best price. It allows us to look at, as you said, right? We don't want to be exclusionary and just focus on one side. We want to see everything that's out there so that we can have the benefit of it. So that being the case, we embrace diversity as a model in our operations, period. And if we embrace diversity as a model in our operations, knowing all the advantages that it has, then that is the way that we can then not be concerned with it's going to go out of the window because the cheerleader is gone. It's because we have embraced the fundamental understanding that it enhances our business operations, be it on the public sector side or on the private sector side. So therefore, it needs to be integrated into our processes. And that's literally where the table needs to build out from.
Absolutely. Let's find the
That's
best
good.
players.
That-
Dale, should we go
that's
to these
good.
questions about the college community and
Yeah.
universities? And, you know, we've talked a lot about corporations and government. How does this impact, or how should it be impacting, and how should be colleges and universities be thinking about diversity?
Got it.
So Lori, hi Lori, glad that you're here. And colleges and universities should be embracing it in the same manner in which corporations are. They are the biggest economic engines oftentimes within the communities that they're located in. They procure goods and services, and they should ensure that their supply chains are diverse as well. We're doing that. We put that charge to all of our state colleges and universities, and the same should be for our private institutions as well.
I think that's good. Terrence, do you all at all work with any colleges or universities?
Yes, we work with actually 3 in New York. Interesting, none in New Jersey.
Okay.
We work with NYU, we work with Columbia University and the University of Rochester. And these relationships have helped as far as getting a lot of our certified vendors into organizations that under normal circumstances, they probably wouldn't be aware of the number of opportunities that come out of these particular institutions. So it's very helpful, and it's hopefully something that we can look at spreading through the state of New Jersey as time moves forward.
There are a number of comments in the chat, and this is something we discussed in our prep call as well. Folks feeling like they're getting just passed around between, you know, from one low-level person to another low-level person, and somehow feeling like sometimes supplier diversity ends up being a gatekeeper. I'd love for each of you just to talk very briefly again about the importance of relationships, and how is it that supplier diversity can actually be, you know, an advocate and a champion and a facilitator rather than a gatekeeper.
I'm afraid to say anything. I may go too long. So I'm
You know what? No, we got, everybody has a quick 2 minutes on it. I think that's the way to think about it, John.
Let me respond to that. I mean, there's some truth to that. I think someone said earlier that it has to be embraced at the top, but not just in words. It has to be driven. People have to be held accountable. Folks that represent the boards of these organizations should also be challenging the spend line by line, item by item. And also, again, I said something about reciprocity. You referenced colleges and universities. We have a number of them that are members of our organization, and they should definitely get it because they deal in facts and theory. So we talked about data today. They have the information, but in New Jersey, the challenge is most of these state-funded institutions are governed by unions. Let's just call it the way we see it. They drive procurement in New Jersey. They're given preferences in New Jersey, and everyone else has to take a backseat to that. That has to be changed, and that's going to be a call that the governor has to make. He's been reelected, and we're going to challenge him. He has to make some changes there. Otherwise, we're not going to get our equitable piece of the pie.
There's a good point. Anyone else want to make a point on that?
So what I would just say is that, again, because I'm a process person, and so when we're talking about those gatekeepers, if we embrace that diversity is important, having a diverse supply chain is important, then that's something that we put into the responsibilities of those, quote, gatekeepers, right? So we're not just, we don't want you to just go out there and, you know, bring in X. We want to ensure that when you're going out there that you're looking at and you're sourcing diverse suppliers and you're evaluated on that, because if you work in any type of institution, your performance is evaluated. And what we know is a best practice is that we can write into performance evaluations just that, right? How are you sourcing? Are you sourcing diverse suppliers? How many diverse suppliers have been added? Because again, we're looking at the data. We understand that it's important from a competitive advantage as well as a qualitative advantage that we have access to diverse suppliers. And so if you, gatekeeper, are falling short on that, then you're not the one.
You're not even being a gatekeeper then. I mean, that's just straight up barrier. Terrence.
Well, I think from our point of view, because we deal with supplier diversity representatives every single day. That's part of our membership. But the important thing is this. What we try to do is make sure that when we send clients to them, they're prepared to do business. So therefore it takes out that whole conversation that they can't do X because of the fact that they are non-white. It's incumbent upon us, our organization, to make sure that our clients are prepared to do business. We also ask our clients to make sure that they do the necessary research so they come prepared and armed with information so that it knocks out a lot of the stories that I don't know what's going on. Or we want to make sure that people, that our clients, our minority business clients, are as prepared as possible. And then we develop the relationships with the supplier diversity people and then try to connect them to the clients that we have. I think that it takes out what I always hear from supplier diversity folks is that you said, these MBEs, quote unquote, are not prepared. What we do is we try to make sure they're prepared. And I'm sure John does the same thing. The question once again gets back to mindset. Some people have a job where they are really interested in helping. Some people have a job to get a paycheck. That's what you got to look at, who you're dealing with. If you have somebody who is really interested in progressing minority businesses through their procurement system, you've got a good supplier diversity person. If you got somebody who got a job basically to get a paycheck, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get somebody that's going to yes you to death and do nothing.
And maybe there's an opportunity for folks that are really truly committed to this to also create, pipeline support to make sure that they're providing the tools and resources necessary for folks to be able to get business at the end of the day. Dale, I know our time is short. How do we want to end this?
Well, I think here's the good thing that I want to really drive this point home. What we hear is the opportunity is there. We started this conversation by talking about profits and how supplier diversity can lead is profitable. We also talked about pushback, but then we led to partnership. And I think Terrence really talked about the partnership, as well as John Harmon reiterated the partnership between the African American Chamber and the New Jersey Chamber. And then we didn't really evolve, but I think there's an opportunity for another discussion here, Jill, around pipeline. How do companies build pipeline of diverse suppliers, and then possibility? And I think possibilities are what's big here, because working together. And I think that if we really, I'm gonna give a little commercial here. Terrence's organization and National Supplier, Minority Supplier Diversity Council, important to be a part of that. The African American Chamber, important to be a part of that. Obviously the New Jersey Chamber, because all of these organizations working in partnership will lead to better guidance and advice that they can provide to someone like Hester at the state level to talk about what is needed to do more. And then also, I think it's going to encourage, we talked about the colleges, we talked about other institutions that are within the state to be more, to create visibility around what they can do to drive supplier diversity. So I think this is a great conversation. There's definitely a need for a part 2, and I hope you all will join us again. Jill, it's always a pleasure working with you.
Great to be here with you, Dale. Thank you so much. And let's turn it back over to Patricia to close us out.
I always have the unfortunate pleasure of following up a really incredible panel when I know that both the panelists and the audience has a thirst for more information. So I am really excited that you all have teed this up for part 2. I think, as is obvious by the comments in the chat and the conversation that we're having here today, there needs to be part 3, part 4, part 5, but also it needs to be not just discussion, it needs to be action. I'm so thankful that this conversation revolved around calls to action and holding folks accountable. And, you know, I think that from my vantage point, and I think from the Chamber's vantage point, one of the things that we're asking folks to do is commit not just to being diverse, but to being anti-racist, and asking people to commit themselves to dismantling the very structures that uphold racial and positional privilege that create these systemic, unequal, and inequitable opportunities for advancement and economic stability. And so that is the call to action, that it's easy to quantifiably check off a box and say we have diverse representation. But where does that begin and where does that end? All of you brought into the comments really great points about it starts with leadership at the board and the C-suite. That's why one of the priorities that we've established with the African American Chamber is board diversity. It isn't just about getting a paycheck from a corporate board, but it is about ensuring that diverse lived experiences and perspectives are informing the very important decisions and the policies and procedures that are being created in those corporate boardrooms, and then using those boards to hold accountable things like supplier diversity and employment diversity and looking at who's in your C-suite. So I am incredibly grateful for all of you, not just for the time that you dedicated to be a part of this conversation today, but for the work you do day in, day out on the ground to move these conversations forward. I do want to call into the room an invitation for everyone to join us next Wednesday. We, with the African American Chamber, over the last couple of months have been holding a series of regional diversity receptions where we've had the great privilege of honoring folks who are doing really great work on the ground to address issues relating to equality of opportunity. And this dinner next Wednesday is the final culminating event. We'll be honoring the U.S. Chamber, who has really kind of set the map for a lot of us and the work that we're doing with our chambers across the state, across the country. And we're close to selling out. So you will get information in the follow-up link, but I encourage you to buy your tickets sooner rather than later so you can be in the room. And to the point that so many folks have raised on this call, a lot of this is also about relationships. And what we're finding at the joint receptions that we've been holding across the state is that, you know, so many of us are on the same page, but we've just needed to be in the same room. And so there is an opportunity next Wednesday to be in the same room and to build the relationships that can help make this work meaningful and sustainable. Also on November 30th, we'll be having both at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. a conversation with Sam Parker, who is the Governor's Director of Appointments, and we'll be providing a little bit of information about how to get appointed to government boards and commissions. Again, we're really looking forward to influencing the spheres and the places where we can bring diverse perspectives and experiences to the table to inform important policy decisions that are being made. And there are 1,100 boards and commissions across New Jersey that need diverse representation and folks with business acumen to help drive policy forward. So you'll receive information about that. And then finally, again, just thank you. Thank you to our President and CEO, Tom Bracken, for taking this on. Thank you to John Harmon for your partnership, friendship, and leadership. And thank you to all of you. We appreciate you, what you do day in and day out. And we thank you for being here with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this conversation. There is more to come. Thank you so much.